Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Kathy Anderson. I'm the program director for UChicago Careers in Journalism. It's a program where we mentor students who want to go into the field. We help them get internships and jobs. And this year we're expanding to help young writers who also want to go into communications and publishing. The program this evening is presented by UChicago Careers in Journalism and the Center for International Studies. And it's co-sponsored by the Program for Global Environment, International House Global Voices, and the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. I just want to say a note about how happy and pleased we are to have the relationship with the Pulitzer Center. This is our third major event that we've done in 6 months with the Pulitzer Center. And through the Pulitzer Center, one of our students, Adam Janowski, there he is. Adam Janowski won the Summer International Reporting Fellowship, and he did reporting from Thailand and Southeast Asia over the summer. And our moderator this evening is Jack Fuller, Pulitzer Prize winner, former publisher of the Chicago Tribune, and current trustee of the university. And our guest tonight is Paul Salopek, who is being sponsored by the National Geographic Society to spend 7 years walking around the world doing slow journalism and finding all the stories that all of us other journalists are too busy to report on and find. I think it's going to be a very, very, very special project, and we look forward to staying in touch. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. Tonight's talk is being video recorded, and you'll be able to view the recording on the Center for International Studies website, as well as on the UChicago YouTube channel. And the format tonight is that Paul will do about a 30-minute presentation, and then there will be time for question and answers. And at the end, we have refreshments, and feel free to mingle and hang out with Paul. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for being here in the University of Chicago, and my friends, my sponsors, National Geographic, the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. And we'll see if my voice holds out for 30 minutes. Just 2 days ago, I got in from the Horn of Africa on my second recon trip for this project. And despite all the hardships of traveling with camel nomads and dealing with security and whatnot, armed guards and what have you, I think it's the airplane error that kind of is the fatal, often fatal stab of foreign correspondence. Anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm delighted to be back in Chicago. I see many familiar faces. You're good friends. And I thank Jack, my former boss and my friend, for agreeing to come down to help moderate this talk. I throw out the idea of a Q&A very seriously, because every audience, every group of people I've talked to have had great feedback that have helped inform this journey. So I'm going to leave as much time as possible to answer your questions and hear your ideas. Anyway, Out of Eden. Over the past 2 years, I've been working on a book, and I've been working on it in a couple of places. One of them is in a cowboy bunkhouse in the Chihuahuan Desert. And writing a book is hard, and sitting down for me in one place for any length of time is hard. And when people ask me, where did this notion of taking an extremely long, slow journey by foot across the world, a narrative journey, come from, I have to be honest and say it's partly due to an escapist streak that hit me about halfway through the book, when my boots were walking out the door without me, and I was looking out at these desert horizons. It's an idea that I think could probably only be hatched in a desert. And what I'm proposing to do is, starting in January, set out and recreate the diaspora of modern Homo sapiens out of Africa across the world, and use science, use fossil evidence, and use this young, explosive science called genography, which is harvesting the history book that's in the nuclei of every one of our cells about what routes our ancestors took when they colonized the world. use this accumulating evidence as signposts to rewalk the ancient trails from Africa to the last corner of the inhabited world, at least the continental world, where our ancestors ran out of real estate and faced their last cold, windy shoreline, and that's Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego, South America. So what I intend to do is use all the skills that I've gathered over the course of a career as a foreign correspondent for the Chicago Tribune and for magazines like National Geographic in places like Africa, the Middle East, the Balkans, Central Asia, Latin America, and elsewhere, take those skill sets and apply them in what I hope to be a more meaningful way to the news gathering method that I've been doing for years. One of the benefits of slowing down over the last couple years and staying in one place is thinking long wave thoughts about what do I go back to as a journalist? Do I go back to a foreign corresponding for other newspapers? Do I try something else? And I love very much what I do. I love going out into the world and landing in a place and seeing it with new eyes and plucking stories up from the ground and interpreting it for readers. But what I've noticed, and what's old hat now in the media world, is that there's just so many headlines. There's so much information, and the media landscape is so fragmented, so atomized, so awash in information that's both credible and a lot of it that's not credible. How can I add to that content without just being another particle, another inchoate voice? So I hit upon the idea of a journey. And journeys have beginnings, they have middles, and they have ends. And if you peg a journey to deep history, they also have the mirror of the past. So I'm calling this Out of Eden because it's a walk from our paleoanthropological Eden in the Great Rift Valley of Ethiopia that we left on several attempts. You know, our species is roughly 200,000 years old, and over the course of that time, we radiated out of Africa in pulses on several occasions. But scientists tell us that something unusual happened about 50 to 70,000 years ago. Up until that time, we'd only reached as far as the Levant, the Middle East. But then something happened that let us explode across the world in a geological eye blink. In the space of 2,500 human generations, which is nothing, we were all over the world. We had become truly a global species. Researching this walk has been really fun because what it's allowed me to do is think about writing and cognition, writing and learning. The prevailing theories about what led our species to so successfully traverse different ecosystems, different habitats, confront different environmental challenges, and still thrive, has more to do with the brain than it does with things like climate change, things like predation, things like famine, things like droughts. One of the prevailing theories is that we migrated along edges, and I love this idea. I love borders. I crossed my first border when I was 6 years old. I grew up in Mexico. We follow lines, and scientists believe that there was a massive drought, tens of thousands of years long in Africa, that may have wiped out 99.9% of us. It was a near extinction event. The numbers of humans that survived it was probably numbered in the hundreds or the low thousands. And what our ancestors did is they migrated to the shorelines as our native savannas dried up and turned into deserts, and began eating what in effect was famine food for tens of thousands of years. And that famine food was scavenging seafood along the shorelines, in particular shellfish. And what does shellfish contain? Well, it's a very rich source of omega-3 fatty acids. Brain food, you know, your mom always telling you, eat your fish, it's brain food. Another line, so we migrated along shorelines. Another line that we migrated out of Africa along according to some paleoanthropologists, are ecotones. And those are the boundaries between ecosystems. You have two different ecosystems that come together and overlap. And it makes sense in terms of adaptation, in terms of exploiting the resources of two different landscapes to walk along that interface. So, well, some of us may have walked out of Africa into the Levant and then down into Europe. A branch went into Europe, a branch went into southern Asia, and then across into Siberia, and then across the Bering Strait into the Americas. Others might have gone further north, where there's an interface between mountain and steppe. So after doing about a year of research and consulting a lot of experts, my plan is to basically use that historical template to create a 7-year record of foreign corresponding across the world, bookended by the cradle of humankind, where we were born, on one end, and on the other bookend would be the last place that we ended up, and where we basically became fully human, that our brains had developed some skill that allowed us to conquer the earth. And the thinking on this is that one of the big advantages that we had over other hominids that were living on the planet at that time was higher language. Some mutation happened, coupled with this high intake of seafood diets. Language gave us an advantage. We were able to interpret the world for each other. We were able to transmit cultural knowledge. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. So it's a pretty cool concept to begin a story with. In the beginning was the word. I'm a word guy. Why walk? Everybody, my own family asked me this question. Why not fly like I have been for years as a conventional foreign correspondent? Why not hail a cab? Walking is, I love storytelling and I love walking. Some of the best stories that I've accomplished in my career overseas has involved intense physicality. It has involved muscular reporting, if you will. And I'll just give you a few examples. And you're noticing here that I'm kind of building an intellectual case for how crazy this idea is not. To do a story on overfishing in Africa, where the industrialized fleets of the northern hemisphere were coming down and poaching on these exposed coastlines, these banks of protein for African populations. I went out and spent weeks in an open boat, a 20-foot open boat in Angola, with Angolan fishermen who were throwing rocks at these industrial trawlers that would come in at night and basically rape the seashore. For a story about the effect of roads and civil war on indigenous populations in the Congo, the Ituri rainforest, I spent 6 weeks walking with Mbuti pygmies through the rainforest, joining them in their hunts. For one story in Mexico about a decade ago, I wanted to do a profile of a mountain range. So I bought a $300 mule in Douglas, Arizona, and rode it 2,000 miles south through the Sierra Madre to Michoacan over the course of a year. So my approach has always been immersive. My approach is always to be as much as possible close to the sources that I'm covering, who are almost always ordinary people, and to not just record their lives, but work alongside them. So walking is a natural way to do that. I plan to walk through the major themes of our day, whether it be climate change, stories about social conflict, stories about armed conflict, stories about identity, stories about cultural endurance, local technological innovations, language extinction, all these stories that recur in our news cycle again and again. I'll be walking through them at 5 kilometers or 3 miles an hour. It's what I'm calling slow journalism. The idea to slow down enough, and here's the key: slow down enough but not completely. because you can have a journalist in situ, an indigenous journalist or a foreign correspondent who spends many years in one place and garners a deep knowledge of that place. But as diplomats know, if you spend a lot of time in one place, you get both intellectually and emotionally vested in that place. And if your job is to be an impartial observer, a very old-fashioned notion, by the way, in today's media ecosystem, your view might become skewed. You start to accrete layers over your eyes, and you don't see clearly anymore. On the other hand, if you parachute into foreign stories, the way I've made my career, by jumping into airplanes, landing into places that are often in turmoil, often in conflict, and then spending 2 days or 2 weeks or up to a month, you come away with a superficial knowledge of what's happening in front of you. So these are two extremes in international reportage that I have experienced for years. What I'm trying to do intentionally, with great intention, in this project is to do something in between, which is not to be completely stationary, but not to rush in either. And I can't think of anything better than walking. You're moving slowly enough to move among the people who inhabit the headlines and to get to know them in an intimate way that's more than just an abstract name in an article. But you're not stopped. You get to inch into the next story slowly. And with slow journalism, you also get to find connections between stories that you would have missed by driving through them or flying over them. I am going to be very careful and very observant to look for connections between the kinds of stories that I would write in the past that I would never have made before. Connections between landscape and education, connections between climate and conflict, the kind of connections that you can only see when you slow down enough. So slow journalism, I'm kind of likening it to is the slow food movement, right? We all I myself eat industrial foods, fast foods. It's convenient. It's indifferently nutritious. It does not have much flavor. It's processed. The news can be that way too. So I'm advocating sort of a slow journalism movement that embraces, instead of heirloom tomatoes or heirloom apples, heirloom reportage. And that's reportage with a deeper meaning that has a backboard in deep history, that has a true understanding in place without being wedded to place. And that hopefully lasts a long time, lasts longer than the news cycle. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just describing sort of the mechanics of the walk. People are curious about it. How is it going to work? What are you going to carry? All that stuff. I'm going to talk more about the conceptual framework of reporting slowly. Aside from gathering string as I walk along and spinning out deep, long literary pieces, kind of on a magazine schedule every 4 or 6 weeks, as the human topography dictates, I also intend to do something that's kind of fun, and something that has just occurred to me in the last year after spending a fellowship at Harvard and spending time with these brilliant young creative technologists at the MIT Media Lab. And that is, as well as, again, the kind of reportage that I love to do, the long form, that I'm trying to inculcate, to draw people into with this journey, with this basically turning current events into a form of pilgrimage. Aside from all that, I intend methodically from the beginning to geocode all of my storytelling, whatever the medium, across platforms. What does that mean? It means that I'll be wired up to a GPS that will record every 100 miles a narrative core sample. What does that mean? That means I have a series of storytelling actions that I'll be taking every 100 miles that will include a video panorama of the surface of the Earth, that will include a sonic ID of the ambient sound at that spot on the surface of the Earth, that will include a series of imagery that includes photographs of the sky, photographs of the ground, photographs of the cardinal directions, and it will include also a standardized interview with the nearest human being to that geocoded site. And that standardized interview will explore the basic big questions that are motivating this walk, questions about human identity. So they'll be on the order, a series of questions about who do you think we are, where do you think we came from, where do you think we're going. So that kind of core sampling every 100 miles across the world will be like beads strung on a string. And the systematic nature of it is probably the coolest part. And I'm afraid to say it's probably going to be the part that outlasts even my so-called literary journalism, which might seem passé 5 or 10 years from now. Because what it'll be is a record of a narrative transect across the surface of the earth along the path of our original discovery of the earth as it looks today at the turn of the millennium. Basically, a narrative transect of what it is like to be alive today in the world. And at the end of the 7 years, again, bookended by the birthplace of humanity and ended by where we ran out of turf, it will be something that I hope both adults and young learners, students will go back to and be able to reference. It's almost an encyclopedia of the planet and our place in it. There are very interesting computer applications that my colleagues back at MIT are helping develop. These interviews that I'll be doing systematically across the world will be portraits and videos and sounds of the voices of real live breathing people that will then, through a computer program, be able to be morphed like an old videoscope camera from the olden days when you used to, like the stuttering effect of a portrait, a collective portrait of the human family. But what's nice about it is that they won't be abstractions. They'll have names and they'll have histories, and you'll be able to stop it on a certain face from Africa, through the Middle East, through Asia, through the Americas, and have real living, breathing human beings be able to tell their story. So I'm excited by both the traditional form of journalism that I hope to inculcate, I hope to nurture along with this long walk, but also these new, sort of more, these shards, if you will, these bits and bytes of narrative that only will gather meaning as they accrete over time. I think it's going to be really interesting, and I'm viewing this walk as a laboratory for both methods of telling stories. And I would expect my own storytelling to change. I would be very disappointed if I'm writing the same kind of stories now that I would be 2 years from now when I'm walking through Tajikistan. I'm wondering what the iambic beat of the two-step walk, 30 to 35 million footsteps, will do to the rhythm of my sentences. So I'll leave it at that for now and show some imagery to kind of give you a glimpse of what is yet to come. And keep in mind that all of this stuff is rough cut. The team that I put together, such as it is a lot. I'm backed by National Geographic magazine. I'm a National Geographic fellow. And the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting is helping out with an educational component to get learners to follow along. And we hope to leave a community of learners internationally in the wake of the walk who will continue a dialogue long after I inch over the horizon. But the imagery that I'm about to show you is put together by volunteers and friends, and I like that too. It's going to have a handmade quality. I don't want it to be too polished. So let's take a look at some of this stuff. This is, Phil, should we take the lights down? Is that possible? One way I'm looking at this walk is it's going to be a walk through the Anthropocene. And as probably many of you know, that's the new term that geologists have applied to the age, the geological age that we're living in. It's the age of humans. And I've had a group up an environmental education group based in Canada, devise a 3D map of the world that has stripped out all of nature and basically left only the imprint that humanity has left on the world today. So these are cities, railroad lines, highways, agriculture, pipelines, what have you. So here's a little preview of what the walk's route is going to look like. That's a hell of a long way. I showed this to my father-in-law, who's an old rancher in West Texas, and he said, "Paul, what's the big deal? That only took 30 seconds." But there are residents here that I like. My background is in science. I'm a biologist by training. I haven't taken a course in journalism in my life. And I end up down in the stomping grounds of Darwin. I'll tip my hat at his ghost when I hang up my boots. And here is just a visualization showing some of the themes that I'll be writing about. What's interesting is that about 2/3 of the route I've been to before. So I'll be building on old storytelling, which is great. Mass migrations, we're living in a time when more humans are moving around than ever before, between 200 and 300 million people. I'll be going through remote areas of the world. I took a horse over the Anjuman Pass to document the fall of Kabul during the Afghan War. This was that story I was telling you about Chinese industrial trawlers raping the fishing resources of Angola. All these fish were the wrong fish. They were just shoveled over the side. Economic stories, globalization. This is Somaliland. They print their own money. That big bundle of cash is probably enough to buy, I don't know, a couple grocery baskets of food. Stories about human dislocation. This is a former luxury lobby of a hotel in Mogadishu, Somalia, a whole city that's been uprooted. And of course, the roots of that sort of dislocation. This is my friend Pete Souza's shot of a B-52 dropping a stick of 500-pound bombs on the Taliban in Afghanistan. Great stories, too. Africa's exciting, and the first part of the journey is going to be great. Africa's coming up. Its economy is booming, growing at 5 to 6%. It's leaped a whole generation of technology into the digital age. Stories about my business, about the media. Now the democratization of the web, who's filming who? I just shot this guy 3 days ago, and he was taking a picture of me using his mobile device. And here are some illustrations of this notion of walking through the Anthropocene, this collective walk that we're all taking into the 21st century. These are visualizations, again, of the human thumbprint on the world. Air routes between Europe and North America. Straight lines. I won't be following too many straight lines. Shipping routes in the Mediterranean. It's beautiful and horrifying. What I'm telling people, let me just remove this scene from the computer. What I'm telling people who are asking again about motivations, another philosophical underpinning that I remind my future readers, many of whom are going to be school kids, is that this is a walk we've all undertaken. Collectively, we've made this journey along this route sometime in our past, if you just go far enough back in our family tree. So it's actually rewalking a walk we've all made.
So let me start with a couple questions, and then we'll throw it out to the audience. Are you at all afraid?
Yes.
And can you localize that? Can you localize that fear? I mean, what is it that most makes you nervous? about this extraordinary venture?
Failure.
Failure. What would failure look like?
I'm not even sure. I've spent the whole day at schools, and again, I apologize about my voice, but I spent the whole days at schools in rough neighborhoods in Chicago and in privileged neighborhoods in Chicago. And it's been interesting to hear the kids' questions about fear. There have been a wave of questions about the dangers of this walk. And without underplaying the obvious risks that involve walking in these rough parts of the world by our definitions, what I have to remind my readers back in the States is that statistically, it's probably as likely that you'll run into trouble in your own city as you will in places like the Rift Valley of Africa or the gravel plains of Central Asia, without being Pollyanna-ish, without being naive, because I've had some rough experiences in my career. What I tell readers and viewers who ask about the fear factor is that not just if I, but if any of you parachuted buck naked into any inhabited corner of the planet, odds are very good that you would be taken in by somebody within walking distance of where you liberated yourself from your parachute, and you'd be sheltered and clothed and fed. That's been my experience, even in war zones. So again, without underplaying the obvious risks, the calculated risks that I'll be taking, I would not be doing this journey if I didn't think that statistically, the overwhelming odds are that it will not be that dangerous.
So have you, and then I'll ask one more question and then I'll open it up. So have you gone back and read quest literature? The Holy Grail stories and so forth. And if you have, what has it told you? What has that reading told you about? How has it informed your thinking about how to tell this? I mean, to me, it's one of the most fascinating things about this is that you're going to be talking about both things at very high level of abstraction and things at the tiniest level of detail. Mm-hmm. And what unifies it is an emotional connection that I think people are going to be making with you mm-hmm. because of the nature of the quest. What is it, sort of going back over the great stories of this sort, that has informed the way you're going to think about what you're doing?
That's a really good question. And I love literature, obviously. So yes, I have, going all the way back to classical, to Homer, and all the way up to Bruce Chatwin, and great magazine writing today. I think the short answer is all journey reportage, all journey writing is enjoyed for two reasons. One is that I think we, at least in this hemisphere of the planet, where our basic needs are met, I think there is an unspoken yearning, a longing that we often can't even put a name to. And I just call it struggle. We've got the muscles to survive. We've got this genetic memory of struggling to survive. But when our basic needs are met, there's also a dissatisfaction that there's something missing. And what better vehicle for storytelling to meet that need than a journey story, a quest story? It's got to be the oldest form of story in the world, going back to the spiritual stories told by Native Americans and indigenous peoples around the world. That's one thing. And then on a more writerly level, some of the best writers that I love, who are questing writers, who are traveling writers, are writers who the journey that you're taking is not really to Patagonia, right? It's the journey you're taking inside of their skulls. You don't read, if you like Bruce Chatwin, and I like him sometimes, I don't like him all the time, but I don't read Bruce Chatwin to learn about Patagonia. I read Bruce Chatwin to learn about Bruce Chatwin's brain. Mm-hmm. And I don't read Ryszard Kapuscinski, who's a controversial figure in our field, for certain practices that he indulged in, to learn about Africa. I read Kapuscinski to read about Kapuscinski's brain.
So let me open it up to questions now from the audience. Yes. Oh yes. Excuse me. You need to journey to the microphone to make yourself heard. So.
I wanted to know if you could describe like the science or the art of slow journalism in more detail, and how it can provide more detail, if you will, than more contemporary forms of journalism.
Yeah, I mean it's a work in progress with me. I don't know if I have even like an ironclad definition of it, but I think it's an attempt to cut through the clutter of the news, which I have contributed to in my career, and again add some sense of coherence to it. And I don't know how else to do it. I've got a limited toolkit. I'm good at certain things. I'm not good at others. I may not be very good at producing high art in my writing, but I think in it's a dunderheaded way for a guy whose feet are stronger than his head to kind of mechanically try to produce meaningful work by just slowing down. It's think about it. It's this journey that I'm proposing is not extraordinary, because for 95% of our history, we have been walking. And what I've been telling the kids in schools today is that I've been playing a game with them saying, how far do you think the average American walks in a year? And how far do you think the average hunter-gatherer walks in a year? And it's fun. The average American walks anywhere, according to studies I've read, from 90 miles a year, which is a pathetic 40 meters a day, to a reasonably healthy, robust person who's athletic, maybe 1,200 miles a year, right? 3 miles a day, more or less 4 at the most. Hunter-gatherers, who they've wired up with GPSs, so this is a really ironclad number, walk on average about 35 to 3,200 miles a day. Think about that for a minute. It's not in a straight line. They travel in circles looking for game and harvesting roots and whatnot. But if you put it in a straight line, that means every single year a hunter-gatherer is on foot as an adult. They walk from New York to Los Angeles. So that's basically what I'm doing. I'm going back to the normal. I think it's abnormal to be sitting so much and not moving. So slow journalism is hoping to tap into that concept. And also, I think, as I said, I think the notion of moving slowly, not stopping, not moving too fast or not stopping, is what will hopefully shape my writing. One other last thing, I don't know if I mentioned it, is that I spent my career flying to story A and then flying to story B. As story A flared up and then story B flared up. What I've never done, really, in a conscious, thoughtful way, is actually connect the spaces in between. And that really intrigues me. What are going to be the connections between story A and story B? The spaces in between that we avert our eyes from because we're moving too fast might be even more important than story A or story B.
Please.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. I think a lot of us really admire you to high hell right now. But I'm wondering, sorry.
Join me.
Oh no, that's actually one of my questions is going in that direction. The first question, one is really brief, one is a little bit longer. The longer question would be going off of what you just said about us as Americans, as the global north, not doing enough walking in our day-to-day lives. How you think we who really admire you and are inspired to go on similar journeys of our own, what kind of words of wisdom you might have for us to make that break with convention. And then the second, much shorter question is a bit more personal, but it's I kind of gleaned from the discussion that you have a family, and I'm wondering how this is going to play out over the course of 7 years.
Yeah, no, both good questions. The first one I think is just experimentation. I mean, my lab is 3 continents. Anybody's lab can be the neighborhood It could be the street that you walk on. I think, you know, it's really hard to do. I'm not downplaying how difficult it is to break out of the mechanized cycle that we live in, to take time to walk. But when you walk, of course, you notice things more. You feel the atmosphere against your skin. You have an opportunity to have a bit of chit-chat on the sidewalk. So I would just say, what I'm urging school kids again is to create their own walks, their own narrative walks, their own journalistic walks, even if it's from their home to their school. Take a little notepad with them and record what they see and what they encounter along the way and who they talk to. That's a beginning. The second part is I do have a family. I have a wife, an amazing person, who's a visual artist, and she will be meeting me along this continuous journey at points of her choosing, and that's important, right? I'm asking so much of her to agree to let me do this that I have to cede power to her, at least this much power. I wish I could cede more, that she gets to choose where she wants to meet. And it has to be in places where she can do her visual work, her visual art. So it has to be a bungalow or a house where we can settle down for a couple weeks or even a couple months, where she can paint and draw. And I'm calling those oases. And I'm walking towards them. And she gets to pinpoint where they are. I think the accommodations will be probably a little better at the oases than they are elsewhere. She's a terrific person.
Hi. So you said that this project in a lot of ways is going to be like a snapshot or encyclopedia of like where we are right now in the world. Though, 2012 going into 2013, it's a very different place than 2005, 2006. I did the math there. So how, like, as you take the individual snapshots every 100 miles and write your longer pieces, how do you expect to account for, whatever huge changes might go on in the world in the next 7 years?
Well, that's another good question. It's the nice tension between this really retro, low-tech means of locomotion and the astonishing era we live in when I can be just as wired as you are, because I'll be carrying a satellite phone. I'll be carrying an ultralight laptop, a sat phone, and, a video cam. I'll be following the news as a foreign correspondent does. That will help inform my very micro-level reporting along the way. But, another thing that comes to mind is the things that I miss are also part of the story. Every story has lacuna. Every story has blind spots. And I think this one inevitably will have huge ones because I'm not going to be sitting in a newsroom. And that's going to be really interesting. I think that's really going to flavor the kind of reporting that I'm going to do. So I think I'm including that. I've had techno colleagues, geeks, say, Paul, they're really obsessing over what kind of equipment to take at the beginning, to make it the most high def possible, to make it kind of archival quality. And I'm saying, well, no, actually, I'll take whatever's available off the shelf because the change in the technology, the change in how this is recorded is part of the meta story. So what if the original video that I shoot it in 2013 looks dated in 2019? That is part of the story. The hyperactivity of our technology is part of the story.
Hi, Paul. I
Hey.
was just wondering a little bit about how you're going to record the walk once it's over. Like, I know you're planning to do these updates every 100 miles, and I think live stream those to a blog. But when the journey is actually over, there'll be so much that hasn't been included in those. I was wondering if you were planning to write a book about the experience, and if so, like how you would go about writing such a thing.
Yeah, Julia, what I need to, I guess, make clear, and I forgot to make clear, is that this 7 years is not continuously walking, right? It's a mathematical number I've arrived at by walking X number of miles a day, based on that scientific measurement of what hunter-gatherers walk. That's what I'm going to try to match, but only for half of each year. So I'll walk 180 days of each year. Those 180 days can be scattered throughout the year, and the other half will be downtime. And that downtime will range from a weekend or a day to months at a time in one place when I'm stuck, on the wrong side of the Hindu Kush in the wrong season, and I just have to wait for the passes to thaw. It's during those times that I'll hopefully have the time to begin pulling together a larger narrative from the daily, weekly, monthly reportage that I'm doing, including books. I've had, what's been interesting is what to do with even all the raw material. And I think that my inclination is to put it all online, everything. Once I cross the border of Ethiopia, dump everything that's in my notebooks online, digitally, to show people what the raw material is for my reportage. Again, it's kind of archival material that would be available to anybody who wants to come later and say, wow, he only used 2% of his notebooks, which actually is pretty close to the real statistic. At least me, I don't shake a notebook out at the end of the day and see what comes out in the form of a blog. I can't do that. Part of our job as writers is to know what to withhold. That's as important as knowing what to include.
Hi, I'm wondering what kind of scientific data and observations and sampling you might be collecting along the way, specifically in regards to global warming and the Geographic project.
Yeah, really good questions. It's one that I've grappled with, and I've gone back and forth. I was originally thinking of becoming like a Mars rover, a human Mars rover on my own planet. And then I decided that was way off topic for a storyteller. I'd have antennas coming out of my head, measuring temperature and all this other stuff. What I'm limiting myself to, because here's the problem. The premise is to remove distraction from the storytelling as much as possible. I need a sense of repose. I need a sense of repose between stories. And let's see how it goes. If that turns out to be not very interesting, I'm open to change. And certainly the recording part of this whole project, it's long enough that it absolutely will evolve. It'll change. But I've ratcheted back the notion of taking all these environmental recordings because I think it would start to interfere, start to become busy work and an excuse not to be thinking about the writing.
If you'll let me ask a question here. This idea of repose and distraction made me wonder, writers not only know their audience, but they make their audience. They train their audience to understand them, to get it. And so you're doing something quite different. And how do you want that to? I'm not talking about in terms of knowledge, but in terms of being, sort of. Mm-hmm. What do you want to train the people who are reading you or following you? What do you want them to think of this, and how do you want, more importantly, how do you want them to think about it, mm-hmm. and how do you want their approach to your work to develop over time? Have you given some thought to that? I'm sensing from what you've said here and then what we've talked about before that you have something in mind along those lines.
Yeah, I think Jack, I do, and I think it's really a continuation of my own work, my previous work. I've never actually gone out intentionally seeking audiences. I'm not even sure that's a strategy that works. I've always had people come to my work, and I think the only thing that I can offer, well, among a few things, is a sense of connectedness to stories, so that they're not taken out of space and time. The thing of my career in journalism has been to spend enough time in a place that you see the hidden connections in a story that are below ground. They're like the roots of a story. And I love that about storytelling. I love the fact that when you find those roots, when you dig them up, they are often really unexpected. And it's delightful to be surprised by the connections. And I go back to this notion of the silences between story A and story B. I think I'm kind of trying to mechanically institute my old method by actually making it methodical. My old method being getting out of the airplane, getting out of the car, and my best work being long periods of time in situ. So deeper reporting.
I would have. I'm thinking that one of the things that people who follow you will perhaps change the way they'll learn just as you've learned the value of moving slowly and and thinking slowly and seeing slowly, that people might be able to recover a little bit of the ability to move slowly, see slowly, understand slowly and deeply rather than quickly and superficially, which I think it's fascinating that you're using, and I think this is critical in journalism generally, that you're using the technology and the methodologies of the moment to expand the way the way those technologies can be used to connect with people and connect with ideas. That to me is, I mean, all of this is fascinating to me, but that to me is as fascinating as almost anything about it.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Please.
Hi, I was just wondering, in the clip you showed at the end, there was video footage of you with the people there. So I was wondering, so that you would have had somebody else there with you. So I was wondering, are you bringing like a team with you, or is this by yourself?
No, I'm not bringing a team. That was my wife. She was along on that walk. No, I've thought about a team, logistical support team, and also a video team. That kind of a video, it's been crafted intentionally for a specific audience, and that is students. Because I'm in it a lot, and I think young learners need a character to kind of help interpret the news or what's happening. I don't intend to be in the frame nearly that much in the stuff that I shoot. In fact, I won't be, right? I'll be shooting. And that's sort of what I like to do. That's my method. It's not shyness or reticence. I just think I find it more interesting not to be such an overt interlocutor. I prefer to let people draw their own conclusions a little more than having some guy kind of guide them through the story. So there will not be a team. In fact, I won't be dealing with TV at all. I've worked long and hard to have that taken out of my contracts. Yeah.
Since your progress is going to be slow on foot, how can you avoid creating some kind of crescendo of publicity where you'll have every TV station and every local journalist pestering you, and then you'll become, instead of the interviewer, the interviewee? And then you also mentioned that you'll be interviewing people at the 100-mile marks. Mm-hmm. Now, if you see somebody that you think is fascinating at mile 99, would you take them over somebody that looked dull over mile 100? Or do you stick to that?
Oh, it's such a Jesuitical question. It's that's the answer is I don't know. What I probably do is interview the guy at the 99-mile mark and hope to hell that I find somebody as interesting at the 100. And if I didn't, if there were nobody, it's obvious. It's a moot point. That is the guy. But if I didn't, then I would probably include that fascinating interview at the 99-mile mark as a side interview that, to be honest, to keep the thing honest. The really key question that you're asking is how to stop this from turning into its own circus. And I have tried really hard with my media partners to make it clear that all the sort of packaging that goes around it has to be really low key. I have really brilliant colleagues who do amazing work to transform the world for the better by being characters in their stories. Many of them are columnists. I can't work that way. It's not my method. My method is very observational. And the moment I start being met in towns and cities by the mayor with the key of the town, that's sort of when the walk stops. That's when it's over. And so I'm building in a mechanism, and they may be too crude in today's world, to kind of keep my location in the moment a little blurry. So there will be a week-long time delay throughout the posting, so people don't know exactly where I am. I'm going to try to stay out of the frame of the stories, both literally and metaphorically, as much as possible, too.
Let me insert myself into the frame for just one more question, because it just strikes me. I don't know how many people know the work of Kapuscinski, who Paul talked about. I admire him enormously, as I know Paul does. He was always a presence in he was often a presence in his work. That is, he did not hide the fact that he was actually there, and that he was, in some ways, influencing the event that he was influencing the situation in which he was recording and writing about. Some of the African stories are particularly like that. So how do you think about that? I mean, there's sort of the epistemological level of it, but also just in terms of storytelling, are you willing to be there the way Kapuscinski was there, or is that too much for you?
I think, Jack, it's almost a story-by-story basis. I think there are stories where it's possible for me, with my equipment, to insert myself in a first person into stories where it really works. And I've written stories that I'm proud of, that I'm in there in first person, because a point of view occasionally does help, right? But not in a systematic way like Kapuscinski, where again, we read him partly because we're reading what it's like to be Kapuscinski, more than what it's like to be in Africa, because he's brilliant at what he does. I think I'll probably be experimenting a little more. I'll be trying to push my own boundaries and see how it goes.
Yeah, please.
2 questions. 1, how will you confront the language barriers that you encounter? And 2, will you be doing extensive reading of the work that's been done in these locations, or are you trying to start with a blank slate?
2 really good questions. The first one's actually pretty, I think it was Diogenes who said, solvatur ambulando. It is resolved by walking. My problem with languages as a professional foreign correspondent is that I insert myself too quickly into languages, and I'm not there long enough. So I'm always relying on translators. The beauty of walking is it will force me. I'll be walking with translators a lot. Local school teachers, local colleagues, students, whoever is willing to walk with me. But by slowing down and moving through environments, cultural environments, languages very slowly, I will finally improve my Arabic. I will finally improve my French in Francophone Africa. So that the language thing is actually going to be easier using this form of locomotion. The reading thing is an interesting one. I've run into a wall in my pre-research. It's just so huge that I have essentially given up reading anything beyond year 2. It's just way too big. And so what I'm taking it is year by year. I cannot stop myself from not reading. It's just in my makeup as a reporter. I over-report anyway, and it's hard to break that habit. But I think I'm going to be walking through areas, through physical and human geographies that are so far off the map that I have not found anything written about them. I mean, not too many people have walked through Eritrea. So I think I'm trying to, spin a positive out of a possible conundrum, but another positive about walking and not adhering to the main channels of communication and transportation is I'll be literally breaking new narrative ground, because nobody's gone there in my position, right? A lot of people go there, but somebody like me who's an outsider telling stories hasn't gone there.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, I believe that during your trip, you might definitely have a lot of emotional experience. Then how you balance this kind of emotional impact and your try to be narrative as possible to telling a story, which is how to balance it. And the second of all is like, how is your personal conception on the unequal distribution of the resources and the poverty issues globally? Yeah.
Okay. I'll try to answer your first one as I understand it. Not getting emotionally vested in a story. You mean? I'm not so sure, as I mentioned to Jack, that there aren't certain stories where it's actually very appropriate to get in terms of narrative, in service of telling a beautiful story, and a truer story, not the true story, but a truer story, is to get emotionally vested in the story. I think that's acceptable across a range of storytelling. Other stories, I think, withholding emotion is far more powerful, right? Because then you might, if you're on the risk of running into a swamp of sentimentality, of emotional manipulation. So I think it'll vary story to story, and that's a complicated answer to a complicated question. The second question about poverty differentials, well, I mean, it's huge, right? I mean, that's one of the things I'll be trying to explore, this kind of hackneyed phrase of globalization. What does it mean? It kind of makes our eyes glaze over. I'm really interested in the growth of the middle class in the developing world, the so-called developing world, which is not really the developing world anymore. I mean, the world is changing so quickly. You know, in some ways, the world is switching, right? The global south is really racing ahead. And I do get the sense when I cross certain latitudinal lines that the global north, it actually seems pretty somnolescent to me by comparison. But crossing these chasms of resources, of poverty and rich, I'll be running across them countless times. You know, some pundits have said that the world is flat. I tend to disagree. I think it looks flat when you stay in a hotel room that's 20 stories up off the main street of the town that you're living in. When you walk through the town at street level, the world is corrugated. And in those corrugations lie the stories that we don't see that are often some of the best stories, including ones about economic differentials, from tiny particular stories to massive ones where enormous numbers of people are basically invisible.
One last question.
My question is, how do you plan to account for in your book the cultural differences from the time that the early humans were there till now, and then including the 7 years that you'll be traveling?
Yeah, it's almost like three-dimensional chess, isn't it? You know, the answer is as best I can. You know, what's amazing, that's not a flip answer. It's changing so quickly. The science, because of genetics, is changing. It's so revolutionary that doubtless the premises that I'm basing the walk on right now will be outdated and probably wrong by the time I finish. And that's acceptable. That's part of the story. It's a journey, among many journeys, it's a journey of cognition. It's a journey of learning. And the fact that it's based on outdated learning is okay, because so was our original journey. And so is every journey that we make. So is in each individual human life. We learn as we go along. So I'll do my best. I'll consult with scientists and try to keep up to date. But I'm sure my information will be out of date a lot.
Well, I think that concludes it for this evening. Although there'll be our little reception afterwards, which you're all invited to join. Just on a personal note, Paul is one of the, it's an understatement to say he's one of the most remarkable journalists I've ever worked with, and it is a measure of that remarkableness that I actually have little doubt that he'll actually pull this off. I mean, as he'd be the first to tell you, the fates will have something to say about that, as they did in all of the Quest stories. But to the extent that one human being can do it, Paul will do it. Your questions have been
Terrific.
Superb, and so if some of you who asked the questions are thinking about journalism, keep thinking about it, because you know how to ask good questions. So we'll meet back at the back of the room.
Yeah, thank you very much.